before we get too far into solving equations, on the last class, we simplified expressions and combined like terms. But before we get too far into solving equations, I want to make sure that we understand how to eliminate the fraction, because honestly, that should be your very first step when you solve equations. You should eliminate the fraction first. So we're going to practice some smaller equations where we eliminate the fraction first. So the other day we talked about separating terms, okay? So in an equation, you have an equal sign, and that equal sign separates your left and your right side of your equation. So if I'm looking at this first example here, I look at the left side and I can see that I have two terms. And remember, the plus and the minus signs separate my terms. And on the right side, I have one term. So in order to get rid of my fractions, I need to find the least common denominator. Now, what that means, it's the same thing as the least common multiple. And if you remember, multiples of 5, 10, 15, 20. Multiples of 3, 6, 9, 12, 15. You want to find the value of the smallest number that they have in common. So in this case, it would be 15. So then the next thing you're going to do is you're going to multiply, and this is very, very important. You have to multiply every single term by that least common denominator, or LCD. You have to multiply every term. So in that first example, we have 3 terms. So we're going to multiply this term by 15, this term by 15, and this term by 15. And when you show multiplication, we're either going to use a dot or we're going to use parentheses, because we're not going to use an X to signify multiplication in algebra. It gets way too confusing. So that's why I'm using the dot. Or if you like, you can use parentheses. So we're going to go through and we're going to multiply each term by 15. Now, in this case, I'm going to do 15 times X, and then I'm going to do 15X. Then I'm going to multiply 15 times 2/5. So let me go over here where I have a little bit of work space. 15 times 2/5. Now, remember when you multiply a whole number to a fraction, you have to put a 1 underneath of it. So here I could go 15 times, because it's top times top, bottom times bottom. I could do 15 times 2 and get 30, and 1 times 5 and get 5. And so then that would simplify to 6, okay? But there's a shortcut that you can do after you get used to practicing with these. If you remember, way back when, hopefully at some point you were taught how to cross cancel. So if I have 15 over 1 times 2 over 5, if you remember cross canceling, you're looking at the diagonal. Both 15 and 5 can be divided by 5. So 15 divided by 5 is 3. 5 divided by 5 is 1. So then I can just multiply top times top. That's 3 times 2 is 6. 1 times 1 is 1. So again, that simplifies to 6. Okay? So we're going to do that same process, but without having to write all of this out. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to look at this 5 right here and the 15 here, okay? And I'm going to say, okay, how many 5s go into 15? How many 5s go into 15? And you're going to say, oh, it's 3. So we're going to mark this out, and we're going to mark this out, and now we're going to be multiplying by 3. So 3 times 2 is 6. And we're going to do the same thing with the next one. We're going to look at this one and say, look at the denominator. The denominator is 3. How many 3's go into 15? And so then you're going to say, oh, that's 5. So we're looking at how many 3's go into 15. That is 5. So then I'm going to multiply this top number by 5. So 5 times -1 will be -5. And then from here, it's a beautiful equation that we know how to solve. So it should be a 2-step equation at this point. So we need to move the constant, and we move that by subtracting 6 here on both sides, because in math we're very fair. Whatever we do to the left, we do to the right. We're going to bring down the 15x. 6 positives and 6 negatives, they equal 0, so they just cancel out. -5 and -6 is -11. And when you solve equations, if the last step that you do should always be to solve by dividing. So I'm going to divide both sides by 15. So x is equal to -11/15. Okay? Let's try another one. All right, so let's look at number 2. Again, first step here, separate your left and your right side. And then you're going to figure out the number of terms. So on the left, I just have 1 term. And on the right, I just have 1 term. And so then I'm looking for the least common denominator. Well, I have multiples of 4. 4, 8, 12, 16, 18, 20, 24, 28. And then I look at 7, and I have multiples of 7, 7, 14, 21, 28. So the smallest number that they both have in common is 28. So I'm going to multiply both terms, because we're fair in math, both sides, by 28. Okay? And so then I'm like, I'm going to do my little shortcut here, and I'm going to say, how many 4's, right here, the denominator, how many 4's go into this 28? So how many 4's go into 28? And you're going to say, oh, it's 7. So I'm going to mark this out, I'm going to mark this out, and I'm going to multiply this top by 7. So that's -21x. So just kind of a refresher of what you're doing there. You're doing -3/4 times 28. And so basically what we did was I said, okay, how many 4's are in that 28? And it's just cross-canceling. You're going to say, get off there, 4 goes into 28 7 times. And so then you do 7 times -3, and that's how I get that -21. It's just kind of a shorter cut. If you go, how many 7's, how many of the denominator is in the numerator? How many 7's are in 28? You're going to say it's 4. So I'm going to do 4 times -6, which is going to be -24. And then my last step here is to solve by dividing. So when I divide here, I'm going to have divide by -21, divide by -21. X is equal to positive 24 over 21. Both of those numbers can be divided by 3, so that would be 8 over 7. And in algebra, we do not change that to a mixed number. We leave it as an improper fraction.